Hey everyone, I'm your host Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to the History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on the show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can listen to exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, few episodes in colonial history of the British Empire have resonated as powerfully or as controversially as the incident known as the Black Hole of Calcutta. On the night of June 20th, 1756, following the capture of Fort William by the forces of Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Bengal, a group of British prisoners was confined in a small, airless dungeon. By morning, most had perished from suffocation and heat exhaustion. This grim event became a rallying cry for British imperial expansion, symbolizing both the perils of colonial entanglement and the narratives used to justify empire. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Bengal was the jewel of the Mughal Empire's eastern provinces, a region of staggering wealth derived from its fertile lands, textile trade, and strategic position along maritime routes. The British East India Company, established in 1600 to pursue trade in Asia, had by the mid-18th century transformed from a mercantile enterprise into a quasi-political force. In Calcutta, the British East India Company's primary base in Bengal, the company operated from Fort William, a fortified enclave that symbolized its growing influence. The fort, named after King William III, was constructed to protect British commercial interests, including the lucrative trade in cotton and silk. By the 1750s, Calcutta was a cosmopolitan city, home to British traders, Indian merchants, Armenian intermediaries, and a diverse array of communities, all navigating the complex interplay of commerce and power. However, the British East India Company's expansionist ambitions bred tensions with local rulers. The Mughal Empire, though weakened, still exerted a nominal authority through regional governors known as Nawabs. In 1756, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, a young and assertive nobleman, ascended to the position of Nawab of Bengal following the death of his grandfather, Alivardi Khan. At just 23 years old, Siraj was aware of the threats posed by European powers, particularly the British, whose fortified settlements and private armies challenged his sovereignty. The British East India Company, which I will refer from now on as EIC, unauthorized reinforcement of Fort William's defenses, undertaken without Nawab's permission, was perceived as an act of defiance. Compounding this were grievances over the company's trade practices, including its alleged misuse of imperial trade privileges, which allowed tax-free commerce. A privilege Siraj believed was abused to undermine his revenue. Additionally, the EIC's decision to harbor Krishna Das, a political rival of Siraj, further inflamed tensions. By June 1756, these simmering disputes reached a boiling point. Siraj, determined to reassert his authority, mobilized an army of approximately 50,000 soldiers, supported by artillery and cavalry, and marched on Calcutta. The EIC's defenses at Fort William were terribly unprepared. The fort's garrison, numbering fewer than 500 men, including European soldiers, Indian sepoys, and civilian volunteers, was outmatched. Much of the fort's ammunition was damp and unusable, a result of poor storage in the humid climate. Moreover, internal disarray plagued the British ranks. Roger Drake, the governor of Calcutta, was criticized for his lack of leadership, and many senior officials, including Drake himself, fled by ship as the Nawab's forces closed in, leaving behind a skeleton crew to defend the fort. The siege began on June 16, 1756, with Siraj's army bombarding Fort William with artillery fire. The fort's walls, though formidable, could not withstand the sustained assault, and the defenders' morale crumbled. By June 20th, after 4 days of intense fighting, the British surrendered. The Nawab's forces entered the fort, and what followed was a chaotic aftermath that culminated in the tragedy of the Black Hole. According to John Hallwell, a senior EIC official and one of the survivors, approximately 146 prisoners, British soldiers, civilians, and Anglo-Indian personnel, were confined in a small prison cell within Fort William, measuring only about 18 by 14 feet. This cell, originally designed to hold a handful of inmates, had only 2 small barred windows for ventilation. The night of June 20th was oppressively hot and humid, typical of Bengal's monsoon season. As the prisoners were packed into the confined space, the air grew stifling, and the lack of water and oxygen led to a panic and desperation. Hallwell's vivid account describes men and women clawing at the walls, pleading for release and succumbing to heat exhaustion, and by morning, only 23 survivors emerged, their bodies drenched in sweat and their spirits broken. The rest, Hallwell claimed, had perished in agony. Hallwell's narrative, published in 1758 as a genuine narrative of the deplorable deaths of the English gentlemen and others, became the primary source for the Black Hole story. He described the Nawab's soldiers as indifferent to the prisoners' plight, suggesting that the confinement was a deliberate act of cruelty ordered by Siraj. The term black hole itself, evocative of darkness and despair, captured the imagination of British audiences and cemented the incident as a symbol of Eastern barbarity. While Hallwell's account helped the black hole's legacy, historians have since questioned its accuracy. In the 20th century, scholars like L. H. Little and B. Gupta challenged the number of prisoners, arguing that logistical constraints, such as the size of the cell and the number of British personnel in Calcutta, suggest a lower figure, possibly around 64 prisoners with 21 survivors. Others have pointed to inconsistencies in Hallwell's story, such as the lack of corroborating accounts from other survivors or Indian sources. Some historians speculate that Hallwell, a shrewd political actor, may have exaggerated the incident to vilify Siraj and galvanize British support for retaliatory action. The role of Siraj in the incident is also debated. While Hallwell portrayed the Nawab as a tyrant, contemporary Indian sources suggest that Siraj was unaware of the prisoner's confinement, which may have been a decision made by subordinate officers. The chaotic aftermath of the fort's capture, coupled with the lack of clear communication, could have led to an unintended tragedy rather than a calculated act of cruelty. The Black Hole incident had profound consequences for British policy in India. News of the tragedy reached Britain in early 1757, sparking outrage and fueling calls for vengeance. The EIC, seizing the opportunity to rally support, dispatched Robert Clive, a rising military commander, and Admiral Charles Watson to retake Calcutta. In January 1757, British forces recaptured the city with relative ease, as Siraj's army had withdrawn. However, the Black Hole narrative set the stage for a larger confrontation. In June 1757, Clive's victory at the Battle of Plassey, facilitated by the defection of Siraj's main general, marked a turning point in British fortunes. The battle secured Bengal for the EIC, paving the way for its transformation into a colonial power. The Black Hole became a cornerstone of British imperial propaganda. It was portrayed as evidence of the Nawab's despotism, contrasting with the supposed civility and moral superiority of British rule. Monuments commemorating the incident were erected in Calcutta, including a prominent obelisk in St. John's Churchyard, and the story was enshrined in schoolbooks, sermons, and literature. As years followed, writers reinforced this narrative, framing the Black Hole as a justification for Britain's civilizing mission in India. In the 20th century, as India's independence movement gained momentum, the Black Hole narrative faced critical scrutiny. Indian historians and nationalist leaders challenged it, viewing it as a tool of colonial oppression. In 1940, a prominent figure in the Indian National Congress campaigned for the removal of the Black Hole monument in Calcutta, arguing that it perpetuated a distorted view of Indian history. The monument was dismantled, a symbolic act of reclaiming historical memory from colonial narratives. Post-independence scholarship further deconstructed the Black Hole story. Recent historians emphasize how colonial narratives, including Holwell's, served to legitimize British rule by portraying Indians as barbaric and in need of governance. The lack of primary Indian sources from the 1756 event complicates efforts to construct an alternative narrative, but oral traditions and regional accounts suggest that the incident was not a significant event in Bengali memory, overshadowed by the broader impact of colonial conquest. Thanks for listening.